The hearing of the Committee on Financial Services will come to order. I want to begin with an apology to members of the public. It was not the decision of this committee to expand the committee. You may note that there is a row of seats facing the audience that ideally should be part of the audience. But the committee has grown in size, and that has taken up some of the room that would be for the public. We apologize for this. We do have another room where people can listen. We promise not to be too interesting visually, so those who only listen will not be too deprived. And I welcome the witnesses. This is a very important hearing. There are few areas in the judgment of many of us on this committee where federal policy has failed to meet its responsibilities more clearly than in helping respond to the terrible tragedy that hit people in Louisiana and Mississippi with Hurricane Katrina. There was, of course, a lot of controversy about the response of the government, particularly the administration here in Washington, and other governments at the time. It is one thing for people not to be able to respond in a terrible emergency in a period of a few days. It is, in my judgment, inexcusable that this much later, a year and a half after those events, so little has been done. No one can use the justification of an emergency or of unpreparedness. What we have is a conscious decision not to remedy terrible conditions in which people ought not to have to live. The purpose of this hearing is not simply to document that failure, although documenting failure is an important part of any effort to move forward. People who say, let's ignore the past and just look to the future, forget that dealing intelligently with the future requires an understanding of what went wrong in the past. Our intention, and I speak here for myself and the chair of the subcommittee on housing, the gentleman from California, who has been very much concerned with this since the day of the terrible hurricane. Our intention is to listen, to elicit information, and within a fairly short period of time, certainly by March, come forward with legislation which we believe will begin to address problems that have for so long been unaddressed. Now, this committee has particular jurisdiction over housing. There are shared jurisdictions. Insurance is shared with the Committee on Homeland Security. Flood protection is shared with other committees. But our jurisdiction is complete in the area of housing. And we have a terrible problem in that a large number of housing units were destroyed. The information we received was that in Louisiana, 204,000 homes were destroyed or suffered severe damage. In Mississippi, 61,000. Of those, 82,000 homes in Louisiana and 20,000 in Mississippi were renter occupied. And we have two related problems: the ability of homeowners to rebuild and get back into their homes, and a shocking neglect of the need for rental housing. And the absence of that rental housing is not simply a social problem, which deserves attention because it means people condemned to live in conditions in which they shouldn't live, people unable to come back to their homes, but it's an economic problem. An article in the New York Times about a month ago reported the decision by the Hurrican company to shut down a factory they had reopened in Mississippi after the hurricane, to great praise. And one of the reasons they gave, and there are always a lot of reasons, and people can be for or against the decision, but one important reason was they had a hard time getting workers because there was no place for these workers to live. The economy of New Orleans, a service economy with hotels and restaurants, requires housing where people who work in those occupations can live. They're going to be renters to a great extent. We have seen a complete failure on the part of the administration here in Washington to respond to that crisis, and indeed there have been efforts by the administration to oppose things that we have put forward that would provide some of the resources. Now, let me just say, obviously, a lot of governments were involved. Our primary responsibility as a committee of the Congress of the United States is to look at our responsibilities as part of the government of the United States. People will be commenting, and there will be testimony from state officials from Mississippi and Louisiana, and that's part of the mix. But the remedies we control, the measures we will propose, will deal with the federal government's response, because it is the federal government for which we bear responsibility. And in my judgment, it is the federal government which has failed completely to meet its responsibilities and indeed to live up to the promises that were made by the President and high officials of this administration in the days immediately afterwards. We have given out some paper that makes that clear, that contrasts the President's promises with the failures. And finally, let me say, people have said, well, why are you now getting to this? In the period after the hurricane, I apologize for my condition, but unlike the condition of the people in Louisiana, it'll take care of itself. A cold goes away. A lack of housing for people does not take care of itself, and it perpetuates until action is taken. The gentlewoman from California, when she was the ranking member of the subcommittee on housing, when I was the ranking member of the full committee, we spent as much time in this past 15 or 16 months on trying to sort out the problems in Louisiana as on anything else. She's been there. She plans to bring this subcommittee there later this month. We tried very hard to sort this out. We were frustrated in our ability to do so. But now, as members of the majority, it is our intention to insist on answers, including from the people who live there and the people who have been trying to deal with it, as to how we can improve the situation, what we, the federal government, our responsibility can do to begin to meet a need that should have been met 15 and 16 months ago, to help people rebuild their homes and come back to their homes. And we then plan to have a legislative package. We've consulted with other committees, the Committee on Ways and Means, which has jurisdiction over the tax credits and others, and we will have a package. I believe that it's appropriate for those of us in the federal government to apologize to the people of the Gulf area of Louisiana and Mississippi, to apologize for having done so little to alleviate the pain that was inflicted upon them through no fault of their own. I can't undo the past 15 months, the past 16 months, but we can commit ourselves to doing everything that is within the power of this committee to start to do what we should have done a while ago. And I now recognize the ranking member of the committee.